And we will start with Rafael Martinez Gordon. Rafael is actually at the University of Groningen, and he's doing his PhD there on system integration aspects. And again, as we're in the modeling session, he's a modeler, and he will tell us about modeling a highly decarbonized North Sea energy system in 2050. Rafael, please.
That is right. Thank you for the presentation, and also hi to the ones joining online. Is the audio working fine? Can you listen? Yeah? Okay. So my presentation is modeling the whole North Sea energy system, which is quite a wide topic, so I will try to compress it in 15 minutes. Just first a brief overview of the research that I've been carrying on during these last 3 years. That's basically the overview of the whole thesis. We did also some spatial resolution research in the first year. But on the last 2 years, we focused more on the modeling part. We developed an energy system model for the whole North Sea region. And we did, in this last month, some case studies related to the whole decarbonization of the whole North Sea region and some offshore wind and hydrogen interactions. So due to the time limitations of this session, that's only 15 minutes, I will focus on this part, because my colleagues already did an excellent job on the spatial resolution part. So I will briefly explain this new energy model that we developed in this last year, and I will give some short results of a case study that we recently finished. So just to start with this, well, this ESRN is the name of this model that we developed, and the first question is why another energy model, because as the ones working on the topic know, there's plenty of different energy models, power system models, heat models, energy system models. Why we need another one? And well, it can be justified because the North Sea is a very particular region with a lot of special aspects. First, as we saw before, it has a very busy maritime area with a lot of different activities, large oil and gas infrastructure deployed, and a lot of active oil and gas extraction. It's highly populated around, and related to that, it's also a very energy-intensive region. Also, there are many different industrial clusters around in Netherlands, Germany, in most of the countries. It's highly interconnected in terms of energy and also in terms of economy. There's a lot of imports, exports, and dynamics between countries. And as we all know, offshore wind is expected to play a major role with huge projections and huge plans for 300 gigawatts in the future or even more. So these kind of features require specific modeling wishes, so to say. So we have multiple spatial claims, as we said before and in other presentations. This deserves high spatial resolution in order to account for all these different activities that can take place. We expect a large deployment of intermittency in terms of offshore wind, solar, etc. So in order to model that, it will be desirable to have hourly temporal resolution. And of course, there's a lot of interaction between energy sectors with sector coupling and many different sectors that will be totally related to each other. So of course, high sectoral coverage is also in the wish list. And if we try to make it perfect, there's also a high interaction between countries. So having this high geographical coverage, it's also desired. But of course, that's a very big wish list, and it's difficult to pack this in an energy model. But that's what we tried to do with this ESRNS model, which stands for Integrated Energy System Analysis for the North Sea region. It's not a very original name. And it's important to mention this model was not built from scratch. We had a very, very good starting point, which was the ESR model. It was developed by two colleagues in Rug, which was focused on the whole energy system of the Netherlands. And it's already published, and there are some case studies on that. So what we basically did was we took this very nice starting point and we enhanced it to cover the whole energy system of the North Sea region. So we have only 15 minutes, so I won't go deep into detail into most of the technical specifications of the model, but just some brief characteristics in a nutshell. The ESR model is a cost optimization model. It minimizes this objective function, which basically includes investment cost, fixed and variable operation costs, and retrofitting costs. That's typical objective function of these wide integrated energy system models. It's written as an LP, as a linear program, which makes it manageable, so it can be run in decent times. Otherwise, this model with a mixed integer or with a more complex formulation would be impossible to run. And it's important to mention it has a complete sectoral coverage of the 7 North Sea countries that we all know. That means that all the greenhouse gas emissions of these countries are taken into account when we do the optimization runs. Another important aspect is that the offshore region, so the North Sea, can be regionalized in as many regions as we want. So the spatial resolution can be tailor-made and customized for any case study. So we can play with it depending on what do we want to analyze. And yeah, just a brief summary of the geographical coverage. We cover the power network of the whole Europe. So the 7 North Sea countries are fully represented. The rest of Europe only includes power, so we can account also for trades of electricity. We also have a natural gas network, a bit more simplified, with some LNG harbors and export and import gas hubs, mainly from Russia and North Africa. And yeah, as I said, the offshore region of the North Sea can be regionalized. For the case study that I will present, we used this kind of political regions, but it could be tailor-made for different case studies. Okay, so that's it. That was the model definition. I will now move to the case study that we just finished, in which we modeled 2050 with high decarbonization targets. This was a joint work with colleagues from the University of Groningen and TNO as well, and it's under review now in Advances in Applied Energy. So I will briefly summarize the scenarios that we used and some small results. And in case anyone is interested, there's also a preprint, so I can distribute it. We can discuss some results later, because now we don't have time to dig into much detail. Well, that's a bit obvious, but what's the trigger is that the North Sea region aims to be carbon neutral in 2050, in line with the Green Deal. And in the last 20 years, we have had a very nice decarbonization slope, but of course, this pace is, as we know, not enough. We need to speed it up, because if we keep this trend, we won't make it to 2030 and 2050. So that was one of the main triggers of this study. And we started building a reference scenario, which most of the data we used came from the JRC scenarios. And yeah, here, I don't know if you can see it properly, but those are mainly industry indicators and activity volumes. So you can see that this scenario assumes a bit of business as usual growth. So economy grows around 2% GDP, I think, per year. And most industry volumes, electricity demands are increasing as well. There's also a bit of increase in energy efficiency. So heat demand is a bit lower in 2050. But the rest of indicators, also transport, go high. So that's kind of the business as usual scenario with net zero mitigation ambitions. And from this scenario, we derived 6 more using modifying different parameters, mainly biomass, which we have high and low, renewable potentials, high and low as well. In one scenario, we banned the onshore renewables, which is also something that is being discussed now, and also CCS, of course, it's also always controversial. So in one scenario, we banned it as well. So these are the 6 scenarios, a part of the reference that we use for the analysis. And the last parameter that we used to define these scenarios was, we call them mitigation ambition. Because of course, net zero can be reached easily or more, it can be more hard if we broaden what emissions we include in the targets. And we have here international transport and industry feedstock. Some targets do not include them because it's international transport, aviation, and navigation. It's sometimes somewhere in between, so no one wants to claim the responsibility. So we have, in some scenarios, we include them. We can consider them more ambitious. And for the low biomass and low renewables, we consider a more kind of conservative approach where international transport and feedstock for industry is not considered. So we can see a bit also the difference in the energy mix if we are a bit more ambitious or more conservative. All this said, I will present now some results from the whole North Sea in 2050 under these scenarios, and we can get some conclusions out of them. Those are the results of the primary energy. The dashed line is just dividing on the right side what we said conservative scenarios and the most progressive ones with all the international transport covered. And yeah, I mean, the first nice conclusion is that you can see the black part is the oil. And one nice thing that we can see is that when the scenarios are more conservative, so to say, the net zero can be reached even using a large amount of oil and gas. On the right axis, you have the share of renewables. So you can see that the net zero is reached with 50% renewables and around 30–40% of fossil fuels. That's a bit unrealistic because, of course, international transport is not covered, and that's a big part. But the moment you move to more progressive targets, oil is completely banished from the energy mix. Natural gas still is a big part, but the share of renewables goes up even to 60–70%. And if CCS is banned, we see almost 93% of renewables in the mix. And yeah, you can see that the mix is mainly dominated by solar, wind, and biomass. I also have put here some supply-demand of different carriers. Here you see the liquids. And there's also here a very nice distinction. In the conservative scenarios, most of the liquids are provided via refineries. So oil is still used in refineries to provide these liquids. But when we move to more progressive scenarios, power to liquids and biorefineries are the only two sources to provide these liquids. And that's also a very big change. And yeah, end sectors are mostly aviation and industry, because those sectors, oil is very difficult to displace. And that's the main reason. We also have here natural gas. And yeah, it's interesting to see that even in very ambitious scenarios, natural gas is always there. Only when CCS is not allowed, gas doesn't enter the mix, meaning that probably even in very ambitious scenarios, natural gas will be part of the system. And it's 6 exajoules is a quite considerable amount. And yeah, even in the high ambition scenarios, we see that natural gas in heat in some countries is very difficult to displace because it's very cheap. And in some countries, heat pumps are dominant, but in other countries where electricity is less easy to get, natural gas still is cost-effective according to these scenarios. And there's also a little bit of natural gas reforming, because as I will show you later, hydrogen is widely used. And in some countries, there's not enough green electricity to produce hydrogen, so the system goes for a bit of natural gas reforming. Yeah, this is the electricity mix. On the left side, you have the capacity, and on the right side, the generation. And yeah, the progressive scenarios have way more generation of electricity, mainly because of hydrogen production. We will see this later. And yeah, as you can see, the solar, onshore and offshore wind are most of the mix. There's a little bit of gas in all scenarios. It's used as peak generator for some certain hours. And yeah, as you can see on the conservative scenarios, gas is quite big because the room to emit is bigger. But in the most ambitious ones, gas is almost negligible. It's very small. It's only for certain specific hours. And yeah, you might ask if the system is feasible in real time. We have hourly resolution, so the system is supply and demand are matched every hour. And yeah, the reason is that there's a lot of flexibility in the system, mainly because of hydrogen production. Electrolyzers are providing a lot of flexibility. So even with this huge intermittency that solar, wind are bringing, the system works every hour. And that's the last part, which is the hydrogen. And here is where you can see the most obvious difference between these two types of scenarios. When we have the less ambitious targets, hydrogen is negligible, it's almost not used. But if we move to most ambitious scenarios, especially if we want to decarbonize international transport and industry feedstock, hydrogen is necessary, and we have around more than 6 exajoules, which is quite a considerable amount in all scenarios, especially in UK, Germany, and Netherlands. Yeah, and that shows that the importance of hydrogen to decarbonize and to provide these syn fuels and industry feedstock, it's almost compulsory, because the only alternative is biomass to provide these biofuels and biofeedstock, but of course biomass is limited, it's not infinite. So these two, biomass and hydrogen, need to be complementary. And I don't know how much time we have left, but there are a couple of sensitivity analyses that we did, which I think are interesting enough to pay a bit of attention. In all the scenarios that we ran before, we didn't have any offshore grid concept, so all the offshore deployments were connected radially to shore. But we wanted to check if we allow some offshore interconnectors, how this will affect the offshore wind deployment. Because Netherlands and Germany, we observed that they were using all their offshore potential, but UK, because their area is way bigger, had some areas that offshore wind was not being invested. So our hypothesis was, okay, if we allow these links, maybe UK starts investing in more wind, and this is exported, and this electricity flows to countries like Netherlands or Germany, where the need of electricity is more stringent. And we did this for the two scenarios with more offshore wind, in which the offshore wind install capacity was very high, was around 300 gigawatts. You will see here. On the left side is the results of the, I don't know if you can see them, it's maybe a bit small, but the left side is the base scenario that we used in the previous runs, and the right one is what happens if we allow these additional interconnectors. And yeah, basically UK in the base case invests around 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, which is quite considerable. But if we allow these links, this number jumps to 171, so it's quite considerable addition. And in the low onshore scenario, which is even more stringent, this happens from 191 gigawatts to 388, which is a huge number. We should later check spatial availability or whatever. Those are numbers from ENSYSTRA, so in theory these potentials are feasible. But yeah, the nice thing is that these offshore to offshore interconnectors are massively adopted by the system, around I think more than 100 gigawatts of HVDC, and the electricity flows to Netherlands and Germany. So this shows that allowing these offshore interconnectors and extra connectivity offshore can help to integrate more offshore wind and can be very beneficial for the system cost perspective. And yeah, that's the last sensitivity we did, was hydrogen imports, because we saw that hydrogen was widely used in the system. But in the other cases, we only produce national hydrogen. In this one, we allow for imports of hydrogen. That's the last slide and the last part. And yeah, when hydrogen can be imported under €4 per kilo, the system adopts it massively, especially in Netherlands. So this shows that if at some point this can be done, this can be also very beneficial for the system. But yeah, that opens the door to more questions, but yeah, we can discuss this later. Sorry for the time, and thank you, that was all.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.